Welcome back. We've covered plenty of bear attack cases on this channel, but this collection might be the worst yet. From a hiker who played dead exactly like he'd been told, only to realize too late the bear wasn't playing, to a seasoned Kodiak guide who knew exactly the danger of a carcass site, but went there anyway. Let's begin with the first story, where a routine airport pickup in rural Alaska turned into the last place anyone expected to meet a charging grizzly. It was May 8, 2026. The morning at Red Willow Regional Airport was doing that classic southwestern Alaska thing. Cold light crawling over gravel, the heavy scent of jet fuel mixed with damp brush, and a turboprop engine dying down. Passengers were just sitting there, waiting for the door to pop, totally oblivious. One of them was Brennick Saar, 39. He was an assistant guide out of Dillingham, and he'd been doing these Friday morning airport runs for 3 seasons. You wouldn't find his face in any glossy fishing magazines. He was just one of those guys you call when the skiff breaks or the gear needs sorting. Brennick knew bears. He knew them well enough to count the flies on a fresh carcass if he had to. But that was out in the deep bush. At an airport? That's different. But Red Willow is what we call a classic bush airport. It's the kind of place where the line between safe zone and the wild is basically a polite suggestion. You walk off the plane and follow a painted path maybe 60 feet to the terminal. It seems foolproof, right? Except the night before someone left a pile of fish-stained trash behind the cargo shed. And fish waste doesn't just attract any bear. It attracts a hungry mother. She came in sometime before dawn, a massive sow pushing 700 pounds, and where a mother goes, cubs follow. 2 of them, maybe 8 months old, slipping through the gap in the perimeter fence like it wasn't even there. By 8 in the morning, all 3 bears were behind that cargo shed, completely invisible to anyone on the tarmac. These aren't teddy bears. A solo bear might bluff, might veer off, might decide you're not worth the trouble. A sow with cubs doesn't run that same calculation. Anything she reads as a threat to those babies gets the full weight of her attention, and her attention weighs 700 pounds and moves at 35 miles per hour. Brennick was standing by the lodge van with his clipboard and coffee when the plane door opened. Dozens of people flooded the tarmac at once. Passengers, ground crew, baggage handlers, his 6 clients. Noise, movement, people fanning out in every direction. One of the cubs had drifted from behind the shed while all of this was happening, just wandered the way young animals do, out into the open edge of the tarmac. Nobody saw it. Then Brennick turned, and there was the sow. Head low, ears flat, already moving. He hadn't seen the cub behind him. Nobody had, but she had. Brennick Saar was the first one she hit, standing almost directly between her and where the cub had wandered. She covered the ground before he could react, 700 pounds slamming into him and putting him on the tarmac before the first scream cleared anyone's throat. Dale Forthwick, 54, stumbled trying to stop himself, went down to one knee right next to Brennick, and grabbed his arm trying to haul him up. It put Dale squarely between the sow and her cub. She redirected instantly. Carla Messon, 41, and Tom Messon, 44, turned back when they saw Dale go down and tried to pull both men clear. The sow caught all 3 of them in the same charge. Dale took another bite crawling toward the terminal wall. Carla caught a blow to the ribs that cracked 2 of them before Tom dragged her back. Then the sow spun toward the cub, which had drifted further into the open. Roy Callister, 61, had been moving people toward the terminal doors and stepped without realizing it into the gap between the cub and its mother. She charged immediately. Roy went down hard, his leg snapping on impact. His son Marcus, 28, watched from 20 feet away and ran straight at her, screaming, trying to pull her focus off his father. She turned on him without hesitation. Marcus got a deep gash across his forearm and hit the ground. That's when airport security came running out. 2 armed officers shouting, closing in fast. The sow had been moving back toward her cubs when she registered them as another threat. She charged. Officer Devin Hark, 33, got a shot off that connected, but a wounded sow with cubs doesn't go down clean. She slammed into him anyway, biting down on his shoulder before his partner fired again. That second shot finally turned her. She wheeled toward the perimeter fence, her cubs scrambling ahead of her, and within seconds all 3 bears disappeared into the brush beyond the airfield. 7 people were down. Brennick Saar, Dale Forthwick, Carla and Tom Messon, Roy and Marcus Callister, Officer Devin Hark. In just seconds, start to finish. The investigation pointed fingers at the airport immediately. Fish waste behind the cargo shed, left long enough to pull a bear family in from the tree line. No wildlife patrols, no protocol for a plane unloading into an active wildlife situation, no system for checking the perimeter before passengers deplaned. Everyone in that region knows what a sow with cubs means, and the airport operated like that knowledge didn't apply to them. The bears were located near the perimeter 2 days later. The cubs were relocated. The sow was euthanized after being confirmed as the animal responsible, though the wildlife officers who made that call noted privately that she had done exactly what a mother bear does. The failure was never hers. The part that sticks with me about Brennick is where it happened, an airport pickup of all places. Selwyn's story is a lot more remote, but honestly, it's just as brutal because he did prepare and still picked the wrong response. It was August 14th, 2015, in the backcountry west of Lake Clark, Alaska, right in that late summer window when salmon are still running. Berries are heavy on the slopes, and every narrow drainage feels like it's funneling life through the same patch of brush. Out there, the alder and willow can close in so fast you lose your sightlines in a matter of steps. And it was in that kind of country that a school custodian from Idaho, who did almost everything right, was about to lose his life. Selwyn Marr was 43. He worked in facilities maintenance at a middle school in Nampa. I like to picture him as the guy who actually laminates his checklist. He wasn't some thrill seeker looking for a wild story. He'd been dreaming of this solo trip to Lake Clark for years, but life kept getting in the way. A roof repair here, his mom's health there. When he finally went, he prepped like a pro. He read the park's safety guides, watched the videos, and kept a printed summary in his map case. He even kept his bear spray on his chest where he could grab it in under 2 seconds. He left a route plan with his sister and set a strict check-in time for 7 p.m. on the 14th. Selwyn trusted procedure like it was a religion. He figured that if he followed the rules would protect him. He knew bears were dangerous, but he didn't realize that not all bear attacks are the same. He didn't know that the move that saves you in one scenario can be the absolute death sentence in another. That afternoon, he was walking through terrain where brown bears love to hang out in late summer. You have salmon in the creek, berries on the slopes, and those tight alder thickets that make it impossible to see what is around the corner. A big brown bear in that region? We are talking 600 to 900 pounds of pure muscle during the summer feeding frenzy when they're trying to pack in 20,000 calories a day. At that point in the season, they aren't trying to share the sidewalk with anyone. Selwyn spotted the bear about 150 yards away. He did exactly what the manuals say, stayed calm, angled toward open ground, and backed away. The bear didn't charge, but it didn't leave either. It ducked behind a slope and popped back up closer, still tracking him. He changed his route to stay in the open, kept talking, and tried not to look like prey. When it appeared a third time, much closer, he pulled his spray and stood his ground. What Selwyn didn't get, at least not right away, was that this wasn't just some defensive bluff. It was shifting into something much worse. That bear kept circling back, cutting off his escape route instead of doing the sensible thing and just disappearing into the drainage. Then the wind shifted right there over the gravel, and Selwyn pulled the trigger on his spray a heartbeat too late. He caught the bear, sure, but just a glancing hit to the face and shoulder. It wasn't enough to stop the freight train. The bear plowed into him, and just like that, Selwyn was down on the gravel. Selwyn went face down, hands behind his neck, just like the pamphlets teach you. It is the textbook move for a defensive mauling. The bear bit his back and shoulder, then repositioned. Then it just stayed there. It kept pulling at his pack, his neck, his head. Every time it paused, Selwyn probably thought, this is it, it's leaving. But it never did. By the time he tried to fight back, maybe 4 to 6 minutes in, he had already lost too much blood. The coroner's report was chilling. Exsanguination from deep lacerations to the neck and head. No injuries to the legs or lower body. It was a textbook predatory attack, not a defensive one. When he missed his 7 p.m. call, his sister did the right thing and contacted the authorities. They found him the next morning. His spray was nearby, partially used. His sister later shared his notes with an outdoor club, and they use his story now to teach a grim lesson. Playing dead is only for a defensive attack. If you can't read the bear's behavior, the rule can be a death trap. What makes Selwyn's case so rough is that he wasn't careless. The next one wasn't careless either, but his mistake looked completely different, and it started with a drone screen he trusted way too much. It was October 9th, 2016, on a cold, windy gravel island near Kaktovik, Alaska. When the weather gets bad, that whole coastline turns into a flat, gray-white blur. You can't tell where the sky ends and the ground begins. The land is just loose, shifting stones that crunch loudly under every step, making it impossible to hear anything sneaking up behind you. It is a completely exposed place where you have to keep your head on a swivel. Aaron Vasca was 31. He was a solo act, no big production company, just him, his camera, and the vast, unforgiving Arctic. He shot footage for conservation nonprofits and stock libraries, usually keeping costs down by hiring local boat operators instead of full field teams. People who knew him said he was methodical and quiet. He wasn't the type to chase danger for a thrill or some cinematic ego trip. He was the kind of guy who believed that if he planned every variable, he would stay safe. It's funny, isn't it? We put so much faith in our checklists, forgetting that nature doesn't really care about our plans. During the previous season, Aaron started using a compact drone to scout for bears before heading out on foot. It was a smart move, and it worked, too. He once caught a bear on his screen and packed up before the animal even knew he was there. But success is a dangerous thing. It made him trust the system, and that is a subtle, lethal trap. The drone stopped being just a helper. It became his primary set of eyes. The barrier islands near Kodiak are just low, flat piles of gravel. There is nowhere to hide, no trees, no high ground, no walls, just wind, ice, and piles of old whale bones that pull polar bears in like a magnet every autumn. In October, these bears are starving, waiting for the sea ice to return. We are talking about monsters here, 900 to 1,500 pounds of muscle that can hit 25 miles per hour. They don't just act like animals. They can drag a human around like a kid with a favorite stuffed toy. Before the boat operator dropped Aaron off, he warned him. He told him the weather window was shrinking, and to watch the horizon, not just his monitor. There had even been a radio alert about bears moving closer to the bone piles because the wind had shifted. On his screen, he saw a polar bear several hundred yards out. He saw the distance on the monitor, figured he was safe, and kept shooting. He was so focused on the image that he didn't notice the sky and the gravel blurring into a single gray, featureless wash. He checked the horizon, but never for long enough to actually track the bear. Each time he glanced up, the bear seemed further away. But the drone's eye from above was playing a trick on him, compressing the distance and making the bear's direct, deadly approach look like it was just moving sideways. By the time he actually stopped, looked up, and held his gaze, it was way too late. The bear was under 100 yards out and moving with zero hesitation. Aaron panicked and dropped the controller. He lunged for the borrowed shotgun strapped to his gear bag, but he was wearing thick gloves and the buckles were stiff. Those few seconds were his life, and he couldn't get them back. He was still struggling with the straps when the bear hit him. The impact drove him into the hard, crusted snow before he could even raise the gun. The bear was on him in a heartbeat, biting down with enough force to shatter his neck instantly. He was alive for a few minutes after the first strike. I know that, because the recovered drone footage caught the sound of the attack. It is absolutely brutal to think about. He was dragged 15 feet across the gravel toward the freezing water. The mauling didn't end when he went limp. It went on for a while. There were no cubs around and no reason for a defensive attack. This was pure, cold-blooded predation. The coroner's report was a list of horrors: blunt force trauma, massive hemorrhage, and bite wounds consistent with a massive, hungry predator. When he missed 2 radio check-ins, the boat operator came back. They found his gear scattered and realized what happened. Emergency crews got there 85 minutes after his last transmission, but he was long gone. Aaron lost track of what was happening because he kept looking down. The next story flips that in a weird way, because his problem wasn't a screen at all. It was a building he thought was empty. It was November 3rd, 2014, in the mixed forest foothills east of Jilin, northeastern China. Imagine an old logging road that just stops dead at a rotting forestry hut that hadn't seen an official visitor in years. That's where a 27-year-old vlogger, a guy who loved hiking into the middle of nowhere alone, lost his life. And honestly, it wasn't because he was reckless. It was because he moved a wooden crate. Toma Ilyan made these little videos about abandoned stuff, old work camps, collapsing shacks, forgotten roads. His audience was tiny, mostly just local hikers and former forestry workers who knew these spots. He liked filming by himself because he felt other people made too much noise. That was just his style, not laziness. He wasn't a wildlife expert, but he wasn't blind either. He looked at old buildings the way you or I would, checking if the floor felt solid or if the roof looked like it might drop on his head. The problem wasn't his attention to detail. It was his lack of experience with bears in late autumn. See, when the temperatures in those Geelan foothills start dropping below freezing and the snow is just starting to coat everything, an enclosed, dry space under a building is exactly what an Asiatic black bear wants. Toma saw the hut as a human story, a piece of history to document. That way of thinking blinded him to the actual danger right under his boots. The hut sat on stone supports, and on the downhill side, there was a hollow, sheltered space beneath the back floorboards, dry, hidden, and perfect for a bear. Asiatic black bears in that part of the world usually hit 200 to 300 pounds. They aren't massive compared to a grizzly, but they are pure dense muscle. They're incredibly fast and have a nasty habit of exploding into a fight if they feel cornered. A bear hiding under a floor in November isn't hibernating yet, but it's definitely not in the mood for visitors. It's irritable, and the space under the floor makes every footstep above sound like a threat. Inside, Toma actually noticed the red flags. He smelled something sour and musky. He saw old droppings near the wall and deep claw marks on the lower planks in the back corner. But he misread it all. He assumed it was just raccoon dogs or some other small animal that had been nesting there for years. It was a logical guess, given the filth in the place, but he was dead wrong about the culprit. While he was busy filming, something heavy shifted beneath his feet. He even heard it, tapped his heel on the boards, and kept going. Then he did the thing that sealed it. Near the back corner, the floor had sagged around an old hatch. There was a wooden crate sitting there, and he pushed it aside to get a better shot of the opening. The bear didn't hesitate. There was no growl, no posturing, no getaway warning. It just erupted through that floor hatch like a spring-loaded trap, catching him at less than 5 feet. The camera, sitting on its tripod, recorded everything. You hear the floorboards crack, one massive impact, and then just raw, chaotic noise for about 40 seconds until the tripod tipped over. Toma did manage to stand up once we know that because of the blood on the doorframe, but the room was a nightmare of clutter. Between the fallen stovepipe, the crate he'd moved, and the uneven floor, he didn't stand a chance of reaching the exit. He collapsed right outside. His head and neck injuries were catastrophic. He didn't stand a chance of surviving, and help was miles away. The bear didn't even stick around to finish the job. It just ducked back through the floor and vanished into the brush. The coroner later listed the cause as severe blunt force trauma to the head, neck, and upper chest with crushing bite injuries. He was gone within minutes. A retired forestry worker who had passed Toma's bike on the road earlier noticed it still sitting there near dusk and called the police. Searchers made it to the hut about 2 hours and 10 minutes later. Toma's channel just went dark. Most of the world didn't even notice. By the following April, locals tore the hut down, partly because it was a safety hazard, but mostly because they didn't want any more explorers meeting the same fate. They never released the video. But the story stuck with the local hikers. The signs were all there, and he actually saw them. Toma wandered into a bear's shelter without knowing it was occupied. Corin faced almost the opposite situation. He knew exactly where a bear might be, understood every rule about carcass sites, and still decided to go back one more time. It was October 17th, 2013, on an alder and spruce slope above a creek cut bank on Kodiak Island, Alaska. The temperature hovered right around 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and with the rain pouring down, the cold really started to sink into your bones. The brush was so dense it felt like you were shoving your way through a solid green wall. This is where Corin Louis Hallmark, 38, a hunting guide with over 10 years of experience, met his end. I've heard people talk about how he was the kind of guy who knew the rules inside and out, but he made one small, tired calculation about timing, and that was all it took. Corin was the definition of a pro. He wasn't a guy who took unnecessary risks. He was the guide you wanted because he actually read the terrain and kept his clients safe. But that fall, he was just plain worn out. He was overbooked, running on fumes, and doing back-to-back trips. On his final day, he'd already helped another hunter with a recovery that morning, and he was trying to finish a solo job before the light completely died. It's that classic just one more thing before I go home mindset. We've all been there, right? He knew the protocol for carcass sites like the back of his hand. You leave the area, you wait, and you come back loud and careful. But when you're exhausted, the weather is turning, and you know the skiff is waiting to pick you up, those safety rules start to feel more like suggestions. Going back to grab those final quarters wasn't reckless. It was just the kind of routine, experience-dulling logic that happens when you've gotten away with it 100 times before. Kodiak is rough, but that slope where he was working? It's nasty. The alder is so dense your vision cuts out at 15 feet, and the spruce roots make the ground slick. Then you have the bears. These aren't your backyard black bears. We are talking about massive Kodiak brown bears, weighing 800 to 1,100 pounds. In October, they are desperately trying to pack on calories. If you leave a deer carcass out, you are essentially ringing a dinner bell. A bear on a kill is going to defend it with everything it has, and their bite force is over 1,200 pounds per square inch. You don't want to be on the receiving end of that. Corin had quartered a deer earlier and hauled one load down. He left the rest behind and came back about an hour later. The rain had picked up, which is a nightmare because it muffles sound and blows your scent in weird directions. Another guide had even radioed him earlier to mention a bear sighting nearby, but Corin stayed the course. He had meat to move and the sun was setting. He headed back up with an empty pack frame, his rifle slung on his back and his bear spray on his chest. He was being careful, stopping every 30 feet to listen. But the creek noise was too loud and the wind was all wrong. He was within 20 feet of the site before he realized the bear was already there, claiming the prize. Responders later concluded that Corin died from a combination of massive blood loss and crushing trauma before he could ever be evacuated. The scene told them exactly what had happened. The deer carcass was still there, partly fed on with signs of a violent struggle all through the brush around it. Corin's empty pack frame had been thrown off to one side, his rifle was found nearby, and the churned ground showed how little room he'd had to do anything once the bear came off the carcass. Because it was a food defense attack at a kill site, the focus afterward wasn't on some mystery about why it happened. It was on how fast it happened. Wildlife officers examined the area, documented the carcass site, and warned nearby guides and hunters working the drainage, but there was no dramatic manhunt and no major public fallout. In Kodiak hunting country, a bear finding a carcass before the hunter gets back is a known risk. Some stories happen because somebody walks into the wrong place once. Corin's is worse in a way because he'd been in that kind of place so many times that one more trip didn't feel like a big deal anymore. It was September 22nd, 2017, on a hillside orchard outside the Turney district in Primorsky Krai. I think about this spot a lot. It's where the fruit trees just bleed into the mixed forest of oak and pine, a perfect hiding place for anything that doesn't want to be seen. You have to picture the outer rows. They were right against the brush line, and for days the local signs of bear activity had been staring everyone in the face. Nadia Vorin, a 52-year-old worker, had seen those signs, the broken branches, the crushed fruit, the massive tracks in the dirt. But when you're facing a deadline and the rain is coming, you just keep working. It's dark, I know, but that's human nature, isn't it? We get so focused on the task that we stop seeing the danger. Nadia had done seasonal harvest work for years, and she was usually the one who took the outer rows without complaining. Those sections were slower, more overgrown, and harder to work, which is exactly why other people avoided them. That morning, the manager told everyone to stay in pairs, but with too few workers and rain on the way, that rule didn't last long. Like a lot of places during harvest, the work took over and safety started slipping almost right away. By September, that orchard had become an easy feeding spot. Fallen pears and apples were already fermenting on the ground, and bears in that part of Primorsky Krai will keep returning to concentrated food sources like that, especially before denning season. In those outer rows, with low branches, poor sight lines, and fruit scattered under the canopy, Nadia could have walked within a few feet of one before realizing it was there. Nadia was working alone, dragging her crate, head down, ducking under branches. She stepped around a tree, and there it was, less than 6 feet away. There wasn't even time for a warning or a huff. It was just instant contact. The bear struck her, and the crate went flying, fruit scattering everywhere, which is almost a grim, pathetic image if you think about it too much. She tried to scramble away, but the slope, the loose fruit, and those low-hanging branches turned those 6 feet into an impossible climb. Workers in the next row said they heard a single sharp cry, then the sound of branches thrashing under the canopy. They started shouting and banging their picking baskets as they pushed toward the noise. However, by the time they got close enough to see into the row, the bear had already pulled away downslope. Nadia was still alive when they reached her, but the trauma to her head, neck, and shoulder was catastrophic. She lost consciousness soon after and didn't survive. Nadia's death barely traveled beyond the district. It got a short mention in the local paper, and then the story mostly stayed where it happened, on that farm and with the people who worked there. But the orchard changed after that. Harvest shifted to full daylight, workers stopped checking the outer rows alone, and the farm started keeping noisemakers near the edge lanes during fruit season. It didn't bring Nadia back, but it did change the way everyone moved through that place from then on. Nadia's orchard had started feeling normal again, even with bears around. And that same kind of false comfort is exactly what put Rakesh on a shortcut he should have avoided. It was July 22nd, 2019, a humid evening hovering around 84 degrees on a narrow footpath between a sugarcane edge and thorn scrub outside a village in Chhattisgarh, India. In July, that kind of path can turn into a perfect sloth-bear corridor, with cane on one side, scrub and termite mounds on the other, and monsoon growth closing the whole route down to just a few feet of visibility in places. That was the setting a pump mechanic named Rakesh Doman was walking through when he cut off the main path and stepped into the brush. Rakesh Doman was 46 and had spent most of his working life keeping irrigation equipment running for small farms across his district. He was the man people called when a pump line jammed during planting season, or a coupling cracked in the middle of the monsoon. He had no public reputation outside the 2 or 3 villages where his name circulated, but within them, he was exactly the kind of person communities depend on, silently and absolutely. That evening, he had stayed late finishing a hose repair on a neighboring plot and wanted to cross to a relative's cane field to check whether water was still reaching the far end of the patch before dark. The shortcut was so routine that Rakesh had stopped reading it as terrain. In the dry months, it was just the fastest path between fields, hard dirt, sparse brush, easy footing. In July, the same route was something else. Waist-high vegetation closing the sightlines to a few feet, cane pressing in from one side, degraded scrub and thorn forest pressing in from the other, the ground wet and soft enough to muffle footsteps. He carried a small flashlight and a cloth bag with pump tools. He had taken this path that week already. The scrub forest bordering the cane fields east of the village sits in one of the central Indian zones where sloth bears overlap closely with agricultural land, moving through degraded forest edges to forage on termite mounds, wild fruits, and insects along field margins. Sloth bears are mid-sized. Adults typically weigh between 200 and 310 pounds, but their defensive aggression is disproportionate to their size, and their attacks are concentrated almost entirely on the head and face, a pattern that produces disfiguring and often fatal injuries at rates higher than most other bear species. But unlike brown bears, sloth bears do not bluff charge consistently. The attack is frequently the first indication of the animal's presence at close range. Villagers had mentioned fresh digging near the shortcut path earlier that week, and broken termite mounds just inside the scrub line, signs that a bear had been foraging in the area. The information moved through conversation the way familiar warnings do in places where wildlife is a background condition, noted, acknowledged, and not quite acted on. No Forest Department advisory had been issued. Sloth bears were part of the landscape. People adjusted around them seasonally and then gradually stopped adjusting. Rakesh had heard the talk about the digging. It was not enough to send him the long way around. At dusk, moving along the narrow path, he heard rustling ahead in the scrub. He assumed it was goats, a stray cow, or another villager cutting through. Rather than backing out to the road, he stepped through a side opening in the vegetation to go around whatever was making the noise. The opening brought him out of the cane edge and directly into the scrub margin, roughly 6 feet from the bear. The bear reacted before Rakesh had fully registered what he was looking at. He threw his arms up and the tool bag came with them, catching the first strike partially, but not cleanly. The blow landed across the upper face and left side of his head and knocked him sideways into the cane edge. He went down and tried to crawl back toward the path opening, but the bear stayed on him, striking and biting at his head and face in the rapid, concentrated pattern characteristic of defensive sloth bear attacks. Not sustained mauling, but short explosive contact. Repositioning, contact again. His flashlight was knocked free in the first seconds and rolled into the brush, leaving the immediate area in near darkness beneath the canopy. People on the road 20 yards away heard him shouting, and then heard a different quality of sound, lower, broken, that stopped them from rushing directly into the scrub. One man bolted for the nearest shop, while others lined the road, shouting and banging metal containers against fence posts to make as much noise as they possibly could. It's that desperate, frantic kind of racket people make when they know time is running out. By the time 6 or 7 of them finally pushed into the brush, yelling and hacking at the plants, the bear was already gone, slipping back into the shadows. Rakesh was lying there near the edge of the cane, still conscious but completely unable to stand. He had been through hell. Deep cuts across his face and scalp, and so much blood soaking into the dirt. It's honestly hard to even visualize that kind of scene without feeling sick. The coroner's report was predictably brutal. It just listed the cause as hemorrhagic shock. They talk about severe lacerations, crushed bones, and missing tissue around the jaw and ear like it's just data on a page. Investigators also noted it was a defensive attack, not predation. Just a sudden, violent reaction at point-blank range. But whether the bear was trying to eat him or just trying to end the threat, the outcome for Rakesh was the same. A shopkeeper called for help, and the villagers carried him out on a charpoy, rushing him toward the road. It took over an hour to get him to the district hospital. An hour sounds like a short trip in a car, but when you're losing that much blood, it's basically an eternity. He never had a chance. The forest staff put up warning signs the next week, telling everyone to stay away from the shortcuts at dusk. And for a while, people actually listened. They avoided the route, and they traveled in groups. But then the seasons shifted. The plants started to die back, and the shortcut started looking like just a shortcut again. Slowly, everyone drifted back to it, one by one. It's almost depressing how quickly we go back to our old habits. We convince ourselves we're safe again because the immediate memory of the fear starts to dull. And honestly, that path is just so much faster than the long way around. We trade our safety for a few saved minutes, every single time.